Hello, my name is Robert Berry, and I am a professor of mathematics education at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. Also, I am the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion in the School of Education and Human Development. As well, I am the past president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And today, my talk is titled Challenging Challenges for Designers Seeking Racial Equity and Social Justice in Mathematics Education. And so, before I jump into my topic, what I would like to do is do a couple of acknowledgments. I want to acknowledge the Monacan people as traditional custodians of the land in and around Charlottesville and pay respects to their elders, past and present. My acknowledgement of the Monacan Nation reflects a commitment to a culture who of inclusion and respect that begins with those who were here first and whose continued presence is important to our future. I also want to acknowledge the work and the individual lives of the enslaved Black people who built and sustained the everyday life of the University of Virginia. Scholars estimate that at least 5,000 enslaved Black people worked on the grounds, with many in residence, starting with the construction of the lawn in 1817 and lasting through the end of the Civil War in 1865. These acknowledgments are a critical public intervention, a necessary step towards honoring the Monacan nation and enslaved laborers, towards enacting a more substantial project of decolonization and reconciliation. For me, these acknowledgments matter, and they matter for significant reasons because it provides the context for understanding the space and the place in which we work and live. And so on the screen here, you see the shield of the Monacan Nation, as well as a map of the University, or the map of Virginia, rather. And just above the word Monacan, you see that's where Charlottesville, Virginia kind of sits, just a little bit above that. On the other side, you see a representation of the Memorial for Enslaved Laborers, as well as an aerial view of the Memorial for Slave Laborers. As I stated earlier, there were over 5,000 people who were in residence here at the university, and all 5,000 of those names are inscribed on the memorial. So if you ever get an opportunity to visit the University of Virginia, I would invite you to take a look at the Memorial for the Enslaved Laborers. So for this presentation, I want to focus on two essential questions. What are design challenges for infusing racial equity and social justice into mathematics? And the second question, what must we do, or what must you do to prepare yourself as well as your students for engaging, around mathematics and around topics of social justice and racial equity? I want to acknowledge that much of this work comes from the work of an edited book in which I co-edited with Basil Conway, John Staley, and Brian Lawyer. We co-edited the book High School Mathematics Lessons to Explore, Understand, and Respond to Social Injustice. And I want to unpack some of this as we kind of go forward because we leaned into this partly for this presentation, and hopefully we can dig a little deeper as we move forward. So, using mathematics to respond to racial equity and social injustice, we thought about four ways or four frames around these ideas. And I want to unpack these four frames, and I want to give time to each of them. So as we move forward, I want to start with build an informed society. And so when we think about building an informed society, we're thinking about how do we create a just society that students become informed by not only their lives, but also the lives of others who may be different from their own. So it's paramount that students connect to social injustices and racial equity expressed by members of their community, their school, their city, their country, and how they may be unaware of the experiences by people who may be different from them socially as well as culturally. And so this idea of having windows and mirrors, a window to see others and see and become aware of their experiences, and a mirror to see themselves and understand how seeing themselves may have an impact on others' experiences as well. The second is connecting mathematics with students' cultural and community histories. So when we think about this, we're thinking about students' experiences in mathematics in schools, and sometimes they're detached from context. And thinking about racial equity and social justice, it provides the context for understanding mathematics and using mathematics as a tool. And so when math is detached from context, it may be the math may become unfamiliar and unimportant to students. And so we want to provide the reason for doing math. Why do we teach mathematics? Why do we learn mathematics? It helps us build some knowledge spaces about the tool, use math as a tool. So students bring with them a wealth of informal math knowledge from their everyday cultural and social experiences. And this helps us build what we call cultural competencies. And cultural competency is thinking about how does building a knowledge space for how their knowledge of social and culture intersect with mathematics teaching and learning. Teaching math for social justice helps build critical consciousness. It helps us identify issues that are unjust and then use mathematics as a tool to analyze, critique, and confront those unjust contexts. So thinking about how do we use math as a tool for analysis, critique, and confront. And then the fourth thing is learn the value of mathematics, or learn to value mathematics as a tool for social change. If we recognize mathematics as a tool for social change, when students that use math to explore, understand, and respond to social injustice, they learn that mathematics, not for the sake of mathematics, the reason for learning mathematics can be that tool to have an impact on communities and have an impact on the broader space in which they live and work. It positions students as being actors within their world. And actors meaning becoming an actor for social change and transforming inequities. So when we say social justice, what do we mean? We mean four things, and we borrowed from the United Nations in defining this. We mean access. How do we think about ensure access to fair distribution of human and material resources in society? So the distribution aspect of that. We mean participation. How do we create equitable opportunities for people to be informed or have access to information about being fully participatory in the decision making about not only their lives, but how it affects others' lives as well. Also, empowerment, supporting people's urgency to take advantage of the opportunities society affords, as well as working towards the elimination of all forms of oppression. So, how do we empower people to eliminate all forms of oppression? And then the fourth thing is human rights. We acknowledge that everyone has the inherent right of being a human being. So human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion, and freedom of work and education. So when we think about these things, we're thinking about what are the rights that every person should be afforded and every person has. And how does that intersect with mathematics or teaching math for social justice? So when we think about teaching math for social justice, it's more than just lessons that implement in the classroom. And so I want us to think beyond lessons. And we're going to unpack this statement as we move forward in this presentation. So here's a task. And I just want you to take a look at this task. I want you to kind of figure out, well, what do you notice about this task? And so the title of this task is, who are our essential workers? What do you notice? Who are the essential workers? Is everyone included? Are there some essential workers excluded? What does the purple mean? You may notice that the purple means the percentage of women. You may notice that all essential workers, 52% of them are women. And what does that mean in terms of impact on communities, on families, and others? And you might notice on the numbers to my far right, the idea of the total number of workers, which in each area category for essential workers. So my next question, what do you wonder? And your wonder could be what questions you may have, who's admitted, who's not admitted, who's included, what's included, what does this mean? Where's the mathematics behind this? Where's the social justice that underlie this? And what are the impacts on community? What are the impacts on people? It is those wonders that might bring up the mathematics and the social justice issue that arise from this. And so I hope that we can peel back a little bit to think about, wow, if 52% of all essential workers are women, what does that mean in terms of impact that it may have on us as a nation, digging down deeper, communities, and digging down deeper, families and such. And then, as I mentioned earlier, what impact does this have on you and your community, and thinking about the windows and mirrors aspect of this? And then finally, what's going on? And when I think about this mathematically, the question that you might ask is there a different way that we can represent this data? And if there is a different way that we can represent this data, how might we represent this data differently? And what message might it convey if we represent it differently? What are the mathematics that we can pull from this? Are there some percentage relationship, or there's some proportionality that's underlying this? So we can think about all kinds of math that we can begin to dig deeper here, but we also have this social justice conversation about the impact on families, communities, and such. So when we think about teaching mathematics for social justice, it's more about lessons. It's more than lessons that teachers implement in their classroom. It is about the relationship they build with students. It is about the teaching practices that they use. And so when we think about that, moving beyond the teaching practices, it's about the goal to develop positive social, cultural, and mathematical identities as authors, actors, and doers. And so I want to unpack the social justice mathematics lesson framework. And there are 6 parts to this framework: equitable mathematics teaching, authentic, challenging social and mathematical questions and concerns, social mathematical understanding, social mathematical investigation, social mathematical reflection, and then action and public product. And so we're going to unpack these 6 things, but you may notice the diagram here when we're thinking about the intersection between social mathematical understanding, social mathematical reflection, and social mathematical investigation. It is that triad that helps us think about what are the questions or the concerns as it relate to the kind of social justice issue. But as we engage in the social justice issue, the action and the public product. So we do this. What is the thing that comes out of this? What is the public activity, the product that comes forward from experiencing the intersection between social justice and mathematics? So let's unpack this framework. One thing that we consider is thinking about, the equitable teaching practices. And on the screen here, I have the work from Julia Aguirre, Karen Mayfield Ingram, and Danny Martin's work on the impact of identity in K-8 mathematics. And they identify kind of 5 equitable teaching practices. And then on the other side, I have from the Taking Action series from NCTM, where they've taken the 8 effective teaching practices from principles to action and thought about how do we then construct these practices in a way that builds a framework for teaching. And so when we think about the equitable teaching practice, we think about going deep with mathematics. So we center the mathematics. So we have a mathematical goal or a mathematical learning focus, and that learning focus of mathematics can be connected to whether it's content, whether it's around content and it's around practices. What is the depth of mathematics? How we then leverage the mathematical competencies? Again, the competencies are around the practices that students engage. So it can be around how do we facilitate discourse? How do we use mathematical connection? How do we use students thinking as evidence? And then how do we position students as doers of mathematics? And then how do we promote problem solving and reasoning? How do we affirm mathematical learners' identity? So the affirmation of identity is the kind of practices that we use in our facilitation of discourse. Who we ask questions, who is not asked questions, who do we get to push in on their resources, whether it's their social or cultural resources, whose social or cultural resources may not be represented in the space. How do we challenge the space of marginality? And so who's marginalized in this space? And we think about the social justice topic, and if the social justice topic has some elements of marginality, how do we then challenge that? How do we challenge that? And if we go back to the task, when we're thinking about women as essential workers, again, thinking about who's included, who's excluded, and thinking about what does it mean that women is carrying the burden or the load of the essential worker activity in the era in which we are living right now. And finally, how do we draw on multiple resources of knowledge? Not only just mathematical knowledge, but also social and cultural knowledge as a resource for our lessons and in our classrooms and in our schools. So all of these things matter. And so we have this goal, we have thinking about the task, the mathematics task, and thinking about the task that's connected to fluency and conceptual understanding. And then we think about the elements of discourse that supports and that surrounds that. So when we look at this idea of the framework, the other four elements I want to bring forward, if you look at this triad that I mentioned earlier, is thinking about the social mathematical understanding. Again, what is the content that students need to learn? What are the practices that they will engage? And what are the social justice standards? And I'm going to invite you to consider taking a look at the teaching tolerance social justice standards. And if you look on the side here, that orange box, the teaching tolerance social justice standards are partitioned in several ways, thinking about identity, diversity, justice. The teaching tolerance standards, I would invite you just kind of unpack and take a look at that. That can inform you what are the social justice standards that I want to use in my K-12 classroom or in my K-14 classroom as well. The social and mathematical investigation. So thinking about not only the social justice topic or the racial equity topic, and how is it grounded mathematically to drive investigation of the social of the context. So we want to center the math, but we also want to, how do we think about the grounding of that, of pushing forward into the mathematical investigation around the social justice context? And third, social justice and mathematical reflection. How do we promote reflection about the mathematics, the social issue, and how do they inform one another? And so thinking about, as we experience the lesson within the framework, it is in how do we create opportunities and space for students to unpack and reflect on the math, unpack and reflect on the social justice issue or the racial equity issue, and then think about how do these things inform one another as we investigate these issues. And finally, the action and the public product. It is, as a result of experiencing this lesson, we have to have conversation about how students view themselves. That's their identity. How students view others and their perspective. That's about diversity. And then how students view fairness, power relationship, and implicit bias. And that's about justice. And so as a result of experiencing the lesson, what action or what product will students use or produce or create that what will be about this kind of idea of social or critical consciousness? There has to be some resulting product that look at the intersection between mathematics and social justice. So it's not the lesson itself, it is then what action does one take as a result of the lesson. So when we think about the matters, what matters, I'm going to say there are four things that matters. And when we think about these four things that matter, I just want to unpack these four things. What matters? Content matters. So content matters. You think about how would the lesson contribute to the learning goals for the class? How would the lesson support the grade level deep mathematics standards? So what is the content and what is the practice? What are the practices? How would the lesson connect to issues relevant to the student? So thinking about the issues that are relevant to the students from a social justice point of view. And how does the social justice mathematics lesson allow students to use math as a tool for analysis? Context matters. So what is the purpose of including the social justice topic? It has to be, when we think about including a topic, it has to be relevant and significant for the experiences that you want to bring, elevate the issue about. What do you know, or what do students know about the topic? And so it's the idea of building a knowledge base. Does it create an opportunity for us to deepen our understanding around the racial equity issue or the social justice topic? I think it's important that you find allies. Your allies do not only have to exist within your school, but allies can exist externally within your community. And allies who might help you understand and learn more about the social justice topic, the ally who may have ideas about how you then incorporate this into mathematics, allies who may have ideas about looking at the intersection between the two, and allies who may help you navigate the sensitivity of some of the topics that you might bring up in your lesson. And then how does the social justice mathematics lesson contribute to building students' identity or your own identity and your sense of agency? And so being identity is being a doer of mathematics, but agency is your identity in action. And that action product, as I mentioned earlier, how does that come out as a part of the lessons? The third thing is, when does it matter? So when you think about, it's not just doing a lesson for the sake of doing the lesson. I think it's mattered for a sense of coherence. And you think about the coherence of doing a social justice mathematics lesson. So how does the social justice mathematics lesson contribute to the goal of the lesson, the unit, or the course? Think about the current events. What current events are relevant at this moment for thinking about social justice and racial equity? How does the social justice mathematics lesson and racial equity build on the previous lessons and support future lessons? So this is the coherence that sits in this space for mathematics. You don't want it to make it feel like it's an add-on. How does it build on previous knowledge or previous lessons that students have experienced? And then how does it then, in terms of the mathematics, and how might it look in supporting building the idea of conceptual understanding and depth of understanding around the topic, the social justice and racial equity topic, for future lessons? And what might students already know? And think about some of the things in terms of relevancy, but there might be things that students already know in terms of prior knowledge for the mathematics and prior knowledge for the social justice topic. And the fourth thing, how does it matter? How does it matter? What instructional strategies will you use to support students both in mathematics and social justice topic? Thinking about your instructional strategies, think about instructional routine, think about representation around those instructional routines and strategy. What questions will you ask? Again, going back to equitable teaching and being prepared for the kinds of questions you ask. But more importantly, how would you prepare for students' reaction? There may be some topics around social justice that may be a little bit sensitive. I think you have to anticipate potential reactions from students and then be prepared to have questions, discussions around those reactions. So this is where allies are so important in this space to help you think about and anticipate reactions to particular topics around social justice. And how will you assess the mathematics, the application of the mathematics, and how they use the mathematics as a tool, and how do we assess to the degree that you've met your goals, both mathematically and social justice wise? So here's another activity. I won't go in depth with this activity, but you can see that there's a graph here. These are representations of athletes across major professional sports here in the United States. But what it shows is this kind of disparity between the athletes, the players of color, and the head coaches of color. And the question now becomes, what mathematics arise out of that? Should there be a proportionality between the players of color and coaches of color? And if so, should it be the same? Should the percentages be the same, or should there be a proportionality? Think about the mathematics and the social justice that comes out of that topic wise. And so you might ask again, what do you notice? What do we wonder? And what impact does this have on you and your community? And think about being participatory when you're unpacking sports and athletics in this case. And then what's going on here? So, and when we think about teaching math for social justice, I think it's more than just the lessons again that's implemented in the classroom. It's about the relationships that we build with and among our students. It's about the teaching practices that help support them and the goals to develop positive social, cultural, mathematics identities. And it's about supporting them as actors, authors, and doers in this space. So I want to provide you here is a link to a Padlet for resources that I just kind of grab and drop in. And feel free to grab these resources, because there are several resources here that I think that might be relevant and so in supporting you and your work. And just grab these resources and use them as you may. There are some that are better than others, but what I try to do is just kind of have a catch-all space for me to think about potential resources that people can use, and for me to use in my own work as well. So I hope that we've been able to address the essential questions. What are the design challenges? The design challenges may be thinking about the matters. thinking about those matters, thinking about the social justice math lesson framework, and also think about what must you do to prepare yourself and your students. And so then pushing on those resources, and I look forward to talking with you in person a little bit later. So thank you so much.